Harvard Divinity School.
Standing Firm, Institutional Leadership and Ethical Risk, April 13th, 2026.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will be starting panel 3 now. I just want to start off with thanking you all for being here and for the care and the intention that you have brought to this entire conference. As you all may know, Black studies, the humanities, just nationally, have been under attack for quite some time. And your presence means so much because it shows this institution and it shows the world that what we're doing here matters, and that this work will continue. So I just want to thank you all for your presence. I do not take that lightly. My name is Adeshike Olofintui, and I'm a first-year MDiv student here at Harvard Divinity, where my work sits at the intersection of womanist theology and African diaspora studies, sociology, and anthropology. I carry into this room the wisdom of my progenitors, Bamidele, Ajewole, and Adejoke, whose shoulders I stand on and whose wisdom I draw from as I do this work. I grew up with what I can only describe as a womanish nature in Nigerian Pentecostal spaces, always asking too many questions, always taking up too much room, and essentially refusing to shrink.
Amen.
And the adults in my life had a name for it. You guys might know it too. You should be a lawyer when you grow up. But womanist theology gave me a different name for it. It gave me language for my own kind of fugitivity and a way of moving through spaces that were not made for me, and in many cases actively worked to push me out. I know I am not alone in that, and many of you in this room know exactly what it means to occupy spaces with you not built in mind, much less shaped by you and for you. So that is what this section is about: standing firm, institutional leadership, and ethical risk. We are here to sit with the hard questions about what it means to lead within compromise and contradictory institutions, how to navigate proximity to power without losing your moral clarity, and what accountability, refusal, and strategic patience actually looks like in the bodies and ministries of Black women who have chosen to stay. These are not abstract questions, they are vocational, they are spiritual, and personally, they are urgent. So here's how our time here will unfold. We'll begin with a short presentation from Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas, and after that, I will introduce the rest of the panel and open up with our questions as we move through our themes. Please give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it is just a privilege, of course, to be in the space that's consecrated by our womanist dean, Dr. Marla Frederick. We thank you for your hospitality, and we adore and stand in awe of her because of the womanist leadership that she's doing at this great institution. So while we were wowed by her, the only thing that rivaled was the Harambee community. It was my pleasure as part of the Womanist Conclave to work alongside Sister Peel and Brother Gibson Davis as they were saying, what might we say, what might we do? And the dean said, they have it. And so we talked about scripture, we talked about themes, we talked about who would be in the room and what was needed at this time. So I want to thank these wonderful student facilitators that the American Academy of Religion and the Society of Biblical Literature need to step aside so HDS can anchor down and do that work. So congratulations. And thank you for creating such a hospitable, consecrated space of both heart, head, and hand. So I appreciate that. I want to acknowledge the Womanist Conclave one more time. Can you all stand up? The ones who have presented, the ones in the room. These women, You only know parts of them and some of them through their work, but what they do whenever they gather together changes space. And that really is what represents what Standing Firm is about: institutional leadership and ethical risk. Now, the theme of this conference standing at the watchpost, draws from the prophetic posture of Habakkuk 2:1 that says, I will stand at the watchpost and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what God will say to me and what I will answer when I am reproved. Now, that verse has always struck me because a prophet does not simply wait for the vision. The prophet positions herself. She chooses where to stand. She accepts that what she sees very well disturbs her, but she's prepared now to give an account. I want to hold that image of the watchpost for a moment longer, because our contemporary culture has given us a powerful re-imaging of it. So not just Habakkuk, but let's go to HBO. In 2019, the limited series, and this is a nod to my husband and Judy Fentress-Williams, who geek out on everything that has to deal with the fantastic world. In this 2019 showing of The Watchmen, we see that there's a remix of the 1986 graphic novel, but it does something extraordinary. It shifts the entire narrative from the Cold War anxieties to a critical examination of structural racism, white supremacy, and gender in American society. It reverses the traditionally white, male-dominated superhero narrative to center an African-American female protagonist, Angela Abar, also known as Sister Night. And through her, it centers Black trauma, Black resilience, and the radical possibility of Black women standing watch over a broken world. The show opens not with a sci-fi premise, but with a historical one. 1921, the Tulsa Race Massacre, anchoring its entire mythology in the reality of American racial violence. And it makes a revelation that I think is profoundly relevant to the panel's conversation today. It reveals that the first superhero in this alternate history, hooded justice, was actually a Black man named William Reeves, the lone survivor of Tulsa, suggesting that the very impulse towards justice, towards vigilance, towards standing at the watchpost was born from Black resistance, only to be later appropriated by whiteness. Now, that's just not a story. That's just not a narrative twist. It's a theological claim. What Watchmen understands and what womanism has always insisted is that masks function differently depending on who's wearing them. In the show, white characters use masks to protect their privacy, but Black characters use masks to survive. The series explores the double consciousness of Black individuals operating within police institutions, using the mask as both a shield against racial targeting and the burden of hidden identity. This is not fiction. This is a lived experience of every Black woman who is led inside an institution that demands her presence while denying her full humanity. The show also centers powerful women, Angela Abar, Lady True, Lori Blake, who make critical and often morally gray decisions. It links gender with race in ways that insist on intersectionality, showing how Black female experience is specifically targeted by systemic violence, but how Black women in turn become agents of disruption. So when we say we're going to talk about standing firm, yes, we are standing on Habakkuk. But I also want you to understand we're talking about the contemporary culture that hasn't changed for those of us who are on the underside of history. And it reminds us that the watchpost has always been our position. The question of vigilance, of seeing what must be seen, of wearing the mask or removing it, these are not abstract questions. They're the questions that define institutional leadership that Black women make every single day. So while you listen to us today, while you ask your questions, but more importantly, while you look at yourselves by seeing our reflections of you, ask yourself, how is your calling your mask? And what are you doing? Are you hidden in plain sight? Are you hidden to do the work of justice?
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas, and thank you for helping to anchor us today. It is now my honor to introduce the three women who we will be in conversation with today. Reverend Verzola Law is the senior minister of Northway Christian Church in Dallas, Texas, a congregation with over 118 years of history and the first Black woman to hold that role. Before Northway, she made that same history at Lindenwood Christian Church in Memphis, making her the first in two institutions that had never counted her among their own leadership. She chairs the board at Bright Divinity School and has spent her ministry at the intersection of anti-racist faith formation, radical hospitality, and the long work of institutional transformation from within. Please welcome Reverend Verzola Law. Reverend Dr. Leslie Callahan has served since 2009 as the fifth and the first female pastor of St. Paul's Baptist Church in Philadelphia, a congregation with 134 years of history. She holds a BA from Harvard, an MDiv from Union Theological Seminary, and a PhD in religion from Princeton. Her scholarly work centers on independent African-American Christianity, Pentecostal studies, and beyond the pulpit, she served on the faculties of the New York Theological Seminary and the University of Pennsylvania. She currently serves as commissioner for the Philadelphia Housing Authority, holding ecclesial, academic, and civic authority simultaneously. Please welcome Reverend Dr. Leslie Callahan. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas holds the E. Royds and Leona B. Carpenter Chair in Ethics and Society at Vanderbilt Divinity School and is one of the foremost womanist scholars working at the intersection of ethics, Black church studies, critical race theory, and liberation theology. She has published 10 books, including Mining the Mother Lode, Methods in Womanist Ethics, Deeper Shades of Purple, Womanist Approaches to Religion Society, and the most recently released, When the Good Life Goes Bad, the U.S. and its 7 Deadly Sins. She co-founded the Black Religious Scholars Group, Incorporated, and the Society of Race, Ethnicity, and Religion, and has served as the executive director of the Society of Christian Ethics, trained as Katie Geneva Cannon's first doctoral student and the youngest named American Academy of Religion Teacher of Excellence Award recipient. She carries that lineage into every space she occupies as a scholar, ordained pastor, executive coach, and institutional leader. Please welcome Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas. Okay. I prefaced that this was going to be one of the more challenging panels, so without further ado, let's get into it. Audre wrote that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. The very frameworks, structures, and logics built to maintain a system of oppression cannot be the instruments of its undoing. That working within the rules of a house built to exclude you will only ever produce a more comfortable version of your exclusion, never its end. Yet ordination, tenure, governance boards, and housing commissions are tools of the institution, and each of you has used them to do transformative work. What is your relationship to that tension, and what is your philosophy about bringing change from the inside?
Good question.
It's complicated. I go back to my fourth grade year. My mind is wired for numbers, and so I was in a number sense contest. And the teachers knew that I had this gift, but the students didn't. And there was a student who will remain nameless to protect the guilty that called me the N word and the B word because I out-tested him. My mother, who was a teacher at the time, and my father helped to integrate the Social Security Administration at the time. So this is the early 80s. And so I went home and I said, I'm not going to compete for that school. They won't get to use my brain. And then my mother said, Verzola Jonan Law. And when a Black mother calls your whole name, and my name happens to have 3 other matriarchs in my name. And so when she sent me back to the school to compete, I outwitted him. Talk about that subversion, but that wasn't enough. I had to move to flourishing. And so I won the state contest in math. They didn't expect for someone this beautiful and this kissed by the sun to win the state contest in math. I did not know how much that would prepare me then for my ordination interview. When they said to me, you should be glad that you're here. There had not been a Black woman in Texas in my denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, that had been ordained since 1988. This was 2001. And I said, actually, my first degree is in math. And I've been recruited by McDonald's and NASA, and I can make more money doing that. So you should be lucky I'm in the room with you. I didn't know I was doing holy disruption then, because the last 2 that I'll name is that I don't mean to go in these places disrupting, but they just bring something out of me. And when I think about the ways in which the church, the academy, does not know what to do with this bodysuit, I just walk in the spaces, occupy them, and I'm responding to the environment. What I did not know is that when my parents named me and put all of those matriarchs, when people say things to me like, well, we're going to call you Verzola, because I pastor predominantly white churches. And when I pastored a predominantly Black church, it was pastor law or P law. I said, well, I'm not comfortable with that. I go by pastor, the same thing that you called your previous pastor. What you called your previous pastor. And they said, well, we would like to call you Verzola. We will call you Verzola Jonan if you like. And I was like, well, that's fine. Y'all just invited 3 other Black women in the room. And so I will say about coming into these institutions, I call it holy disruption. But I do it with love and a whole lot of grace, and always both, telling the truth. I don't know, what I do know for sure is that these institutions were not designed with me in mind. But I have a 9-year-old granddaughter, and I will not leave the institutions as I found them.
It's really a great question, and it's, it just, I agree it's complicated, and it's all kind of how you approach it. I'm the baby in the family, and I grew up apostolic, and I just figure wherever I am is where I'm supposed to be. And so I just don't approach it that way. I don't ask, did you make this space for me? I figure if I'm here, it's mine. And my job is to sort of show up in it. And as it goes, sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. I actually find it more helpful to be prepared for it not going well. Like the places where I have been most harmed are not the places where I knew it was going to be tricky to navigate. The places, it's those other places that say they're for you when they actually aren't, that are more troubling. But for me, I'm like, if I'm here, I'm supposed to be here. And if I ever get the sense that I can't be here, then I can leave. So I just don't approach it that way. And in every, there have been moments in every one of those spaces. So I no longer serve. I recently ended my tenure on the board for Philadelphia Housing Authority, but it's a mayoral appointment. I remember early on, I didn't really know any of the other people, and the context in which I was appointed, the Philadelphia board had just come out of receivership. And so ours was the first board since it had returned to local control. So we were the first board that the mayor had appointed, that the city council had approved. And so we're in this meeting, and we're at a point where we're having to select officers for the board. And I remember one of my colleagues said, well, it's my understanding that the mayor wants so-and-so, so obviously that's what we have to do. And I was like, hold up. My assumption was if the mayor appointed us to the board, that they expected us to function on the board. And so I don't have an objection to the person, but I want to be very clear at the beginning of this that the role is not to take orders from the mayor about what we do once we're on the board. What was beautiful about that stance and that position, which most of us held, is that we came into the board after a time when the public distrusted the activity of the board, the whole thing that had caused it to be in receivership in the first place, caused there to be a lot of mistrust, most especially among the people who lived in public housing. And what we were able to do over time as a board that operated transparently, even when sometimes you end up making decisions that people don't like, but people could trust that you weren't making the decision on the basis of your own interest. And so when we first started on the board, the public meetings would be absolutely packed as people came. And then eventually people were like, okay, they all right. And so people would just come if they had a particular issue. So I think if you trust that you're supposed to be in the places you are as yourself, which is part of what you're saying, Pastor Law, then the way you operate, I guess one way to say it is, you don't end up with only the master's tools. You brought some stuff with you that create other opportunities. Because when you showed up, even in that house, you didn't show up just with you're not limited to the tools that are presented.
And I think what is key there is how both of my colleagues have spoken about. There is a tension in what Lord says, and she's right. You can't use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. But what you have to realize is you built the master's house. So clearly you can use the same tools to build your own. So first what you have to do is stand flat-footed in your social context. Each woman here is named today, who they are, right? And that means we have to confess our social context. So I am a Black Texan. I tell people I'm from Barbara Jordan, Texas, not Barbara Bush, Texas. I'm an endowed chair at a very prominent PWI that has political issues, right, with how it stands with this present administration. I live in the Green Hills in the buckle of the Bible Belt, in a very prominent property. And I am also someone who's very invested in the love and the beauty of monogamy, marriage, and motherhood, unashamedly. And those are parts of the master's house. So the issue is, how do you use tools without getting used by them? Right? How do you use tools as a skills person rather than becoming a tool in history? Right? So two things are happening there. One of the things that's happening is one thing to be at the Watchpost, but it's another thing to be at the Watchtower. So many of us, once we become the first, or once we have amassed our wealth, want to become gatekeepers, right? And so you'll realize, particularly in underrepresented communities, and probably the Black community in and of itself, the only time where all Black people are going to be happy and stand up and cheer somebody is when somebody says first. And one of the myth busters that Alice Walker does in her definition, she talks about colorism is one. We don't have time to talk about that today. That can be another panel. But the myth of exceptionalism. How dare you take pride in being the first? Right? And what was so beautiful about Kamala Harris was, and what they were threatened by, she said, I will not be the last. Right? So part of being at the Watchpost means just like those people who've been positioned in history, the same way as we talked about Shipra and Puah, Jochebed and Miriam, Pharaoh's daughter, help me out, Hebrew Bible scholars, Zipporah. All of these women who never met for a meeting, never had a conference, never gathered, right, with resources. They used their watchposts. They stood flat-footed, understanding who they were and whose they were and what the cost would be. And they used those tools subversively. They made the man, protected the man, promoted the man before God showed him how to use his stick or his mouth and how to wield it. And when he was dislocated from those women, he lost his blessing, cursed God in his masculine rage, and did not get to the promised land. It was women who were at the watchpost. And so I want to say that we have to understand what to do with our tools, so then we don't become the tools of history.
Not sure if anyone else can feel it in the room, but the spirit is one today because
It was a staff, not a stick.
my next question is actually,
She corrected me. It was a staff and not a stick. But a staff is a big stick, right? I mean, the Bible says. Oh, you mean that? Yeah.
my next question actually is connected to something that I believe that you, Dr. Leslie Callahan, and you, Dr. Stacey Floyd, mentioned about what it means to be the first, and how people who are the first often occupy those spaces. And so this is coming from me as well as my fellow Black scholars here, Black womanist scholars. Much of the conversation around institutional leadership focuses on navigating predominantly white spaces, but there is a less spoken dynamic, the role that Black scholars, clergywomen, and professionals play with one another inside these institutions. Many in the emerging generation have experienced gatekeeping or a crabs in a barrel mentality from the very people they look up to. How have you had to navigate that? And how do you think this next generation should handle it?
So I actually think it goes back to something that Melanie Price talked about earlier today. I think that when we're navigating these spaces and these relationships, I think we ought to have clarity about who's there and what they're there for.
That's right.
Yeah. I think we ought to have clarity about who's there and what they're there for. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to have any kind of relationship with somebody, you have to make sure that you all have the same understanding of what that relationship is supposed to be. I think sometimes people come in with the expectation that you are going to be in a certain kind of relationship because of your embodiment. So I'm a Black woman, you a Black woman, we gonna be kin in some particular kind of way. And it goes in both directions that we didn't agree on. What I agreed to at the St. Paul's Baptist Church is to be the pastor. I didn't agree to be everybody's mentor. I didn't agree to be everybody's friend. I didn't agree to be the elder folks' daughter. I didn't agree to be the younger folks' mama. I didn't agree to be any of those things. And insofar as some other sorts of relationships emerge, of mentoring, etc., those things have to be negotiated. They can't be assumed. I think the place of the greatest unintentional hurt is in the places where people have assumed that the relationship is going to be a thing that's not articulated or negotiated, or that's not the nature of the relationship in the space itself. Now, some people are assholes. So sometimes people are hurtful and they got stuff with them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the unintentional places where assumptions get made about what the relationship is going to be like. And then when it doesn't go that way, the person does the, I thought you were going to be this, or I thought it was going to be that. And it can be deeply hurtful. But I think the hurt resides in, it's in that it's not about, you think you're so important, or you think you're smarter than everybody, or you whatever. It's often like we just didn't have the same perception of what this is supposed to be.
Exactly.
And then there's the thing Melanie also talked about who somebody reminds you of. Like, all of that is real in every kind of relationship. The stakes are just higher when the people are minority. And when people feel underrepresented and they feel like they don't have any other options. It just makes, if there's one Black woman there, how you feel about that one Black woman is they're much higher stakes. And it also happens in the other direction. Like, when we sometimes have hopes about what our students are going to be, or about what our parishioners are going to be. It can go both ways if people didn't agree to be whatever it is you thought they were going to turn out to be.
Great question. My last response was it's complicated. This one is probably it's layered. Because in one season of my life, I was all of those things and prided myself in being it. And it almost killed me. Diabetes came from me. Hypertension came from me. And it almost killed me. Literally, I'm on a table, dying. And as I think back from that place till now, there's this beautiful jewel diamond prism that my grandmother gave me. And I hang it in my office because it moves and I'm able to see things differently each time I'm looking at it. So I can go back to why I did that in one season. But in this season, I can no longer be that person because I got married December 6th, and that's now the most important relationship. Some of y'all gonna get that on the way home. Because I never imagined at 52, I'm 53 now, being a married woman. I had never been married. And then that shifted the way I responded. So now I'm better able to understand why my mentor put some boundaries around our relationship. I just thought she didn't have enough time for me. I'm better able to understand why my pastor responded certain ways in certain times. Again, I thought he didn't have enough time, or he just didn't care for me like he cared for someone else. But he really was creating something else in me that's serving me better in this season. So I was walking around with that kind of trauma and hurt, but this is what I believe as a pastor and a leader, and that I hope to pass to be a kind of Kamala, to be able to say, well, I might have been the first at a 180-year-old church and a 120-year-old church now, I won't be the last. Because if hurting people hurt people, then I believe healing people can heal people. What are the kinds of things do we need to be healed from so that we don't pass that kind of dysfunction? Valerie Bridgman says, this is how we function. And so as I've acknowledged that, I'm able to say now, that no longer serves in this season. And so, what are some ways I can learn from a generation younger or older than me so that I might move into these spaces better and move the other ones better? So my deepest hope and prayer is that I am more healed. I feel like a gospel song. I'm better. I'm wiser. I'm stronger. And out of that, right, then I can lead in a different way. We have been so hurt by the church and by faith and religion. And so let's not pass that on. I love the way Tracy just named, so that we can move out of the I, the colonist view of faith, to this we. And I'll close with this piece on this. When I went to Ghana 2 years ago, one of the greetings they greeted me with was sawubona. I see you. But they just kept saying it. I was like, sawubona. They were like, no. Until they locked eyes with me and I locked eyes with them. That they can see past all the stuff, past all the pain and hurt, past the transatlantic, past sawubona. And so when we understand that kind of divinity and humanity in one another, then maybe this institutional transformation can really be real.
And I think the point there is about how we internalize scarcity. And the earlier panel talked about that. There's a level of moral sophistication that you go to when you've gone from hurt to healing. And anyone in this room with a PhD can talk about all the scars. But it's where do we go beyond those scars? And I think it harkens back to what Leslie was saying. We have to realize not just what happened and how it happened, but why did it happen? Yeah. There's a difference between institutional products or conditioning and personal failures. What am I saying there? The crabs aren't the problem. The barrel is. The crabs are not the problem.
That's right. That's right.
The barrel is. And there's just only so many ways crabs know how to move. But if we could just figure out, why does the barrel have to be the container? One of the conversations we were up talking about late last night, that we're lamenting and worried and praying for future generations because that wheel in the middle of the wheel has been lost, right? So people aren't dying for the scarcity to perform or to speak because they had that experience when they go to church to give the Easter address. People aren't dying to prostitute themselves for ordination or promotion or tenure because there's an elder at the church that says, aren't you pretty? Aren't you? Without trying to scratch the middle of your hand or put candy in it. That you making sure that we have enough space, enough affirmation to say, sawubona, I see you. And so what we have to realize is a lot of people are blinded by the light. And that's not just a Black female condition. I mean, that's as old as Plato's Republic. Right? You can get people out of that cave so they don't see the cats, and as soon as they see the light of the possibility, they can't handle it. And I tell my students who are preparing themselves for ministry, they say, Dr. Floyd Thomas, it's the Black women who are the worst in the church. And then I said, but have you ever stopped to ask the ethical question? Why? They see you doing something that they never thought was imaginable. Here you are being affirmed by the grandson of the very person that told them to shut up, woman.
That's exactly right.
And who do you think you are? Yeah. And if you ask yourself in that why, it changes how you move in the barrel. It makes you create different space. And so it is that moral sophistication rather than moral slovency that we have to move ourselves towards it, because it's easy to blame the person. Yeah. Right? But we wrestle not. Right? It's those spirits and powers and principalities. And if we can deal with that spirit, then we know how to cultivate spirit in different places.
Speaking of the Spirit, this is a directed question to you, Reverend Dr. Leslie Callahan, In preparation for this panel, I actually watched one of your lectures, Binding the Strongman. And you identified the strongman as this authoritarian patriarch whose power depends on fear, hierarchy, and the silencing of those beneath him. You identified this specifically, though, not just as a theological problem, but as a political one. And I want to press on something a little bit closer to home, which I think you touched on there earlier. What happens when our own liberative spaces do the same thing? When womanist circles or feminist institutions and progressive denominations produce their own strongman, just with the right politics, the right credentials, and the right language of liberation. You argue that the call for repentance begins not with the keepers of the evil system, but with the community of the faithful. So I want to ask you directly, what does it mean that we may have built the same altar under a different name? What does repentance demand of the people in this room? What does it cost me? What does it cost you?
Thank you. Thank you for listening. So yeah, I mean, I gave versions of that talk several times, and never did I give it to, always in Black communities. And one of the things that struck me, it was giving it around the time of the first Trump presidency, and that's the thing that struck me about Trump's election, is that it was so easy. The first thing that happens, I don't know if you all remember in 2016 when he was elected, one of the first things he did was to come out with this plan for what he called religious freedom. And it was targeted towards the Black church specifically. And on the Sunday, it came out actually between the time when he was elected and that first or second Sunday afterwards. And I talked about it at the church. And I said, we should be concerned that he thinks that we care and are more connected to Islamophobia, homophobia, and a certain kind of Christian supremacy than we care about any of these things that he's planning to take away from us. There was it was very calculated, and it's in that context that I talked about the strong man and our own too often commitment to authoritarianism in our systems. As again Melanie said earlier, some of our congregations are headed by despots. So what I think we have to do is just acknowledge that this is a problem wherever we find it. What I want is us to have some consistency around the behavior, irrespective of the person who is behaving in that way. And I think if we got there, if we had an ethical practice that says, that there are ways that we treat one another with dignity and humanity, and we honor one another's voices and so on, and we stopped making excuses for the people who don't do it because we like them. We see it in our politics. There's some folks who want to let Swalwell off the hook because he's a Democrat. I'm like, why would we ever do that? Why throw all of the rapists in the same hopper? They can all go. And until we actually are willing to hold accountable ourselves and people we like, I don't think we ever get past. And what it does fundamentally, and what I tried to argue there, is it also makes us vulnerable to people who hate us. So in the first place, we shouldn't like the strong man in our own context. But if you look at why certain aspects of our community, certain people are attracted to Trump, it is because he represents ideals. The worst parts of him represent things that some people idealize. The misogyny, some people idealize that. The lack of boundaries, some people idealize it. They aspire to it. They want to be that and have that. And until we deal with that part, we can't deal with him. All right, so that was what I was saying. Unfortunately, it's still relevant specifically to say, because we didn't learn the first go round, apparently.
Thank you. Thank you. In the interest of time, I would, like you all to touch on the ways in which you've built community within these spaces, within these institutions, like your advice for us as emerging leaders within and scholars within these institutions. How do you build and cultivate healthy and uncompromising relationships? But I also want to talk about, I guess, the other side of that, grief. That's what comes with being in these institutions sometimes for so long. You each have been doing this work for decades. You've been inside of different congregations, academies, denominations, and the nature of womanist institutional work is that it moves slowly, surely, but slowly, and that the transformation that you're laboring towards often outlives the moment that you are in. And I think that there's a very specific grief to that, a grief that the communities that you love and that you spent your whole life serving cannot yet follow you to where you want to go. How do you carry that? And how do you deal with that particular loneliness spiritually? How do you tend to it, not as a leader, but as a person?
Yoga. The breath that I've learned in yoga practices has helped me. I am the chair of the board of an institution, and the end of my second year of divinity school, the then president, who's now no longer on this side of glory, invited me into his office and disinvited me for being a part of that institution. I'm the chair of the board of said institution now. And I've also chaired 2 searches that put the interim and the now president in place of the very school that disinvited me. And I graduated from another school. Do the math. So that happened in 1999. Fast forward in 2017, the brand new president, he had been there 10 years, invited me to come be on the board, never imagining I would be the chair of said board. You talk about grief. Because I'm like, God, why would you call me to this? Because the president then said to me, like a shoe, you might not be fit for ministry. And that crushed this then 25-year-old single black mother. But the church healed me and reminded me that the president didn't call me, but that God called me. And the church, in my grief, walked me through the stages, past acceptance to joy. So I know normally in the stages of grief, we don't have joy. That's not, joy is in my stages. When we say weeping endures for the night, but joy comes in the morning, that's part of the stages. And so that deep grief helped form and inform how I move through this institutional change. So when I'm now at the board meetings, we do breathing exercises when the tension gets thick. Because I have Palestinian sympathizers, and we're one of the few Christian seminaries that also have Jewish persons on our board. So that October 7th, it was holy chaos in that board meeting. And the only way that we could lead through that moment is through breath prayers. The only way that we can lead through this woman is that my full black woman grandmotherhood stood up, and I said, y'all gonna behave at this table. I can't fix the Gaza Strip. I can't fix the U.S. But at this table, we gonna breathe until I see all the shoulders come down. Until I see some real syncopated breath. We're not moving forward, and this meeting will be adjourned. And it's taking that kind of authority, because I will say, as a womanist, we inherit these positions, we move into these institutions with the responsibility, but not the authority. And someone said earlier on a panel, to partner with God is to author with God, That's the root of authority. And so finding ways in the institution that kicked me out to claim the space that they invited me back to is to author with God to change some of these big divides. And the last thing I'll say is I'm a bridge builder. But what I learned, my husband is an engineer. I just want to say that one time, my husband.
Lord have mercy.
He's an engineer and a project manager, and I'm in a spreadsheet. I'm very clear that he's project managing this marriage. But he told me, beloved, he said, dear, you build bridges from both sides, and I see you doing all the work.
My God, today.
But in order for the bridges in your church and in the places you work, it got to come from both sides. And so we have to be honest. The reason why we have Easter for the Christian narrative is because there was a death. Let's be honest about this empire. Let's be honest about this death. Let's be honest about the pain and hurt and agony so that we can talk about the real hope of resurrection. It comes with death. And so how we hold that grief, how we hold that joy is the both and that we do that work by bridge building from both sides.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause. That is a wonderful note to end on.
Sponsored by Office of Student Life at Harvard Divinity School.
Copyright 2026, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.